Hey guys, and welcome to my Unity game development tutorial series. And today I'm just going to show you some of the basics to game development. And if you want to make your own game in Unity, well, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks and how to get started with the engine. So this is the project creation screen. You can create two types of projects. You can create a 3D project and a 2D project. For this certain demonstration, I'm going to show you the basics to making a 3D game. So let's name our project. We're just going to name it Enrique Tutorial for the sake of simplicity. I'm just going to save it in my documents, and you could add an asset package, but we don't need to because we can just do that later on. So we're just going to leave it like that, and we're going to create the project. So wait up for the project to load up, and soon enough you'll be presented with a new screen once all the assets import. So the project started up, and it should look something like this. So I'm just going to run you down through most of what you see here. It may look quite complicated at first, but it's actually quite easy. So over here we have our scene, our sample scene, and we have the main camera and the directional light. Basically, everything in the main camera is your game. So the main camera is positioned here, and it is facing this way. I just right click my mouse in order to be able to rotate the camera view, and here you can see a camera preview. So if you switch to game, this is basically your game. This is what the camera picks up on, and of course you can program your camera to follow your character, etc. Over here we have the asset store, and this is where you can purchase or download certain assets from, but we're not going to worry about that now. If you don't have the asset store, you can just go to window, and you can import the asset store through here. You can bring in the different tabs. Another thing to notice about the main camera is you have an inspector over here, and basically in the inspector you have you've got all the features of the device you've selected. So you've got the position of the camera, you've got the rotation, you've got the scale. So say we wanted to change the position so the camera was centered in the middle of the game, we'd switch the X value to a 0, the Y value to a 0, and the Z value to a 0. And this just means that your camera is now in the center of the game. So you could also move the camera around by use of these arrows, and you can hold Command or Control Z to undo that. Also, you have various tools here. You have this rotation tool, you have this expansion tool, but all these tools you can also do the exact same thing just through the inspector itself, and the inspector changes depending on what item you have selected. After that, we have basically the project tab, and you might have these tabs in a different order. This is just because I've used Unity before. But you've got your assets folder. Assets basically just means everything that you're going to have in your game. You store it here, and then when you want to import it, you drag it into the scene. But and then it comes with the default scenes folder made by itself, and then depending as to whether if you imported packages or not, you're going to have a packages folder down here. When it comes to the scenes, this sample scene is the exact scene that we're in right now. We can delete this scene if we want, and then this would go away. But and we can also create new scenes, of course. After that, we've got the console tab, and basically this is for coding. If you ever make errors when you code, the errors are just going to show up in the console tab, which is a good thing to know. When you have errors, Unity just highlights it. Next, after that, we've got the animation tab. You might not have the animation tab, but if you want to drag it in, just go into Window, Animation, and click on Animation, and it'll show up. Also, something to notice is you can actually drag tabs around. You can move them. You can make the tab be by itself. You can move it up there. I'm just going to keep the animation tab down here. There's also an animator tab, and the animator tab is different from the animation tab, and we'll go into that later. But going back to the inspector for a second, also something I forgot to mention is that every different thing here is a component. So this will be the transform component, this will be the camera component, this will be the audio listener component. So if you ever want to refer to the transform component in a script, you'd have to write get component and transform. But you can also add your own components, and Unity has a big list of different components depending on what you want to do with each item. So after that, we're going to take a look at build settings. So we're going to go into Unity. Well, we're going to go into File and Build Settings. Now, this is only for when you export your game, or for when you want to set out your scene order. So the order in which your different scenes are in. So say you have, let's say you have a house that you want to enter. That would be a different scene that you'd link down here. And it only exports the amount of scenes that you link. So say you don't want to export this sample scene, you would just untick that, and more scenes would show up depending on the amount of scenes you create. Then you can export to different platforms, but keep in mind when you download Unity, you need to download the export modules if you want to be able to download to those different platforms. Also, something to notice is you can't export to things like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One without a license. So you need a license to export to that, which you can buy from Sony or Microsoft. So we're not going to worry about the build settings right now, but now I'm just going to show you how to actually add something to your scene. I'm just going to right click, I'm going to create a cube. So now, as you can see, we've created a cube over here, and just to show you how the inspector component works, let's just reposition the cube to 0 by 0 by 0. You've got your X, your Y, and Z axes like your mass. If you want to double the size of the cube, you can do that in scale by changing it to 2 by 2 by 2. And this would technically be 8 cubes inside of one cube. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 8 cubes in one cube pretty much. So you can manipulate things within the inspector. You can also mess around with the rotate factor of the cube. So I've just hovered my mouse over the X over here, and I can make the cube itself rotate a certain way. So I can rotate my cube if I want to. Gonna Control Z on that. Also, another thing that I'm gonna need to show you is about the colliders. So as you can see, this cube has a box collider component, but if I were to create a sphere, oh no, I created it as a child of that cube. I'm going to drag it out. If you create something whilst you have an item selected, then what you create is going to become a child of that item, and that is indicated by the arrow of the object, and I didn't mean to do that, so I'm just going to drag it out. So if you want to create something without having it be a child, make sure you have nothing selected, and then create the 3D object, which in this case would be the sphere. Now if we take a look at the sphere, you can see that the sphere has a sphere collider, but the cube has a box collider. The reason, well, collider is what stops things from hitting each other in a game. So then if this didn't have a collider, then in the game the sphere could phase right through the cube. But thanks to this collider, both of these items will collide and they won't be able to hit each other. Also, depending on what item you're trying to create with the sphere, you could even add a box collider to the sphere itself if you want the sphere to collide a certain way. It really depends about what item you're trying to make. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to delete that sphere. Next, we're going to reset the cube to normal. So we're going to bring this back down to 1 by 1 by 1. Let's just have the rotation set to 0. So we could have create a terrain if we wanted to, but I say for now let's just stick to the cube and let's manipulate the cube itself into terrain. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to change the scale X to a 10 and the scale Z to a 10. So as you can see, we've just created a terrain over here, or something kind of like that. So then another thing I should go into detail now is directional light, and as you can see, this here is the directional light. Now, if you want to change where the light itself is shining, you can do that by manipulating the rotation, and you can rotate the light itself, and that will change your skybox to nighttime or daytime. And lighting is pretty important in games, so you can change the way your lighting works. Also, you can change the type of lighting you have. So you could basically change it from directional lighting to point, and then if you wanted to, you could change the range. So the normal range is 10, but you can make the range as big and as little as you want. I'm just going to leave it at 10. But if you go out of here, you can see this sphere. This is the range, and if you change it, the sphere either decreases or increases, and this just shows the amount of lighting you have. So 1 would be that, 2 would be that, 3 would be that. I'm going to leave it at 10. Oops, 10. Alright, so now I'm also going to show you spot lighting, and if we quickly change the rotation to 0 and 0, what we can do is we can rotate on the y-axis, and we can rotate on the x-axis. So if we rotate on the x-axis, you can see that we actually create some sort of little spotlight. So if you have a scene, for example, which you set in a theater, and you want to have a spotlight, you can easily create an effect like that. Also, something to notice is you can actually change the color of your lighting. So say you wanted a red light, for example, you could easily change it to red. And there's lots of ways you can mess around with lighting. We're going to go more in depth into it later, but for now I think this is good. So we're just going to change the lighting back to point light, and we're going to leave it like that for now. So I think it's time we start importing our actual textures into the game. So if we click on our assets folder and we right click and we create a new folder, we can just go ahead and name that textures. It's very important to stay organized when you make games, and it's always good to set out different folders for what you have. So have a folder for audio, have a folder for scripts. Now we're going to focus on textures. So if you check the link in the description, I linked you to 2 textures, and we're going to go and import those real quick. So download those textures, and I already have them over here. So I just got these off of Google. You can easily find your own if you want to, but just for this demonstration, we're going to go with the asphalt texture and the sidewalk texture. So now if we want to actually apply this texture to the cube, we're going to need to transform it into a material, or if we want to, Unity transforms it into a material by itself. So all you have to do is you have to click on the texture you want and drag it onto the cube. And as you can see, it applied, and when it did that, a new materials folder was created, and in here we have the material that it actually made when we dragged the texture onto the cube. Now there's different things you can mess around in here, and something I want to start off with is the normal map. So if we head back into the textures folder and we click on here, you can see that there's different texture types you can go with. I'm going to leave this one as default, but if we want to create a texture normal map, basically just Command D and duplicate that. Let's just rename it asphalt 001 underscore N and have the N stand for normal map. Now the way we change this into a normal map is we'd go into the texture type and we'd change that into normal map. I'm going to apply that, and as you can see, it changed blue. And now the way we add that to our actual material is we click on the material, head back into textures, and here where it says normal map, we're just going to drag this here. And as you can see, we've created a normal map of our texture. Now we can actually mess around with the metallic look of it. But something you might want to do is you might want to head back into the asphalt 00N normal map and you're going to want to tick create from grayscale, because that actually makes a big difference. I'm going to apply that, and as you can see, it completely changes what it looks like. Then we're going to head back into materials, and we're just going to tick emission. Emission isn't important right now, but it's going to make a difference later on when it comes to coding and things like that, if we ever need to mess around with this. So might as well tick it now. Also, another important thing you might want to take a look at is tiling. So say we change the tiling to 2x2. It completely changes the way this looks and makes it look more reasonable. What I usually go for these type of textures is just a simple 4x4. And I think this looks best when it comes to concrete. But keep in mind the settings are going to be different depending on the texture you have. Another thing to note is we can change the way things illuminate onto this texture. So if we just change the global illumination from baked to real time, that's going to have a difference later on in the game when things light on it. It's going to change to real time. So you could also have a secondary normal map if you wanted to, but currently there's no need for that. But this isn't the only way you create materials. You can actually go ahead and create your own material from scratch. So the way you would do that is you would right click, create, just go ahead down and pick material. Then we're going to rename this to sidewalk 001. And all you need to do to actually apply the texture to this material is you would just drag in this to the albedo. Then after that, you're going to want to duplicate, so we can create a normal map for the sidewalk too. And we're going to rename it to sidewalk 001 underscore normal map. We're going to change it to normal map like we did with the other one. Create from grayscale. Go ahead back into the material. Of course, apply the settings. And go into textures and just quickly apply the normal map to here. Might as well tick emission, change this to real time, and have the tiling to a 4x4. So now we actually need to apply this material to an object. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create another cube, but this is a good template to start off of, so we're just going to duplicate this particular cube. Going to duplicate that, and you may not see it, but there is actually a cube inside of this cube, and we need to move it out. So something I want to show you is snap settings when you do move items. So if you go into edit, go down into snap settings, you can see that you have them set to 1, 1, 0.1 and 15. And then what that basically means is when you move it on the X, on the Y, or the Z, it snaps by 1. So to demonstrate that, just hold down Command or Control, depending on what you're on, and drag it up, and it drags up by 1. Now, if you want to actually change that, you can go back into snap settings, and you can change that to 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. And now when you try drag it up, it's just gonna snap up by half, as you can see. I'm gonna drag it across. See, it's only snapped up by half. I'm gonna position it a little more down, just for the sake of it. And we're gonna go ahead into the sidewalk, and we're gonna drag the sidewalk material onto here. So there we go. We have successfully created our sidewalk texture. Also, just for the sake of simplicity and being organized, because being organized in game development is crucial, we might want to rename this cubes, because it's going to get a bit confusing after we add lots of cubes in. So let's just go ahead and rename this to asphalt section 001. Let's rename this to asphalt section, no, to sidewalk section 002. Now this was just a small little introduction to textures and materials and the Unity interface as a whole. And before we go ahead and finish off, we're just going to save this. Go to Unity file, save scene as, and we're going to go ahead and save the scene as open world, because why not? Let's just go ahead and save it into our scenes folder. Save it there. Now if you go into your scenes folder, you can see that a new scene has been created, open world, and this is this exact scene that we're in right now. So we've successfully saved our project, and next time we're going to take a look at starting to code and introducing a character or a third-person controller into the scene. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.